Hello and welcome back to Pandemic Playground with Dave. So today we have another experiment for you guys, and that is making the modular system for our crane. Alright, so if you guys do watch my Surviving Pertam, the Wasteland series, the current yellow crane that I have here, want to turn into a modular system, and I tried it with different ways. And it didn't work out too well during the series, at least. So one way of the modular system I did was to connect it to the tip of the crane using a connector. So we can connect to another connector so that everything and all its ports are connected so that it could transfer material very easily. So I did that. Didn't really work out because the way we store the tools. So if it's modular, we gotta switch one piece to another piece fairly easily. And we were having a lot of difficult times there. So check out that video. I'll leave it on top right for you guys so you can see what I did with those different modular systems. And it was a combination of merge blocks and things like that. But ultimately, Clang did pay a visit and pretty much destroyed the crane itself too. But of course, this is an experimental series and we have a little bit of a crossover. So I want to try out a different modular system. So we tried to do it with the connector only because we wanted the connecting ports, and that was one of the best way to do it. We used a merge block to merge on the walls, which is probably the poor way of doing it. But if we were to use a different system, we had to have a battery on the modular piece or the tool itself, which causes the biggest issue too. So instead of that, and I did read some of the comments, some good ideas that you guys had. One idea that I didn't see and I really want to try out, and that's today's episode or today's experiment, and that is using a modular system with projectors. So yes, this looks a little funky, but this is just a little bit of a prototype just to see how things will work out and if they will work out. So this is 3 different projectors because it houses 3 modular tools. It's going to house a welder, a grinder, and also a drill system. And here I just plopped it on for now. You have a hinge with your welder, your hinge with the grinder, because what we're gonna do is weld up a projection and then grind it down, and then weld up another projection, grind it down, and that's how we're gonna switch our modular system here. And I wasn't sure if it's gonna work out well. I mean, ideally it sounds like it will work. I mean, you're not really wasting parts either because you're grinding things down and then you're welding the same parts again. So you just need to contain some of these pieces in your crane system or your storage in order for it to kind of work out constantly. So I am in creative mode, so the welders will weld up pretty quickly. It'll be a little different if you're in survival mode without creative on. So let's just see how it kind of works. I have 3 projectors on. I already preset the blueprints on each one so that every time you turn them on, you'll see the projection right there, and once you weld it up, it'll be solid colored and everything like that. But when you grind it down, you can turn it back on and off to show that projector of that specific tool. And then the next one we have, if we turn off the first one, is the grinder system, where you'll see is the same setup there. And lastly, we have the drill setup, which is 2 drills and a conveyor. So that's how we're gonna do the modular system in this way. So it kind of works out in some sense. So in this setup, this current setup, it's not the best setup in the world, to be honest. And of course, keeping this might not be most ideal because you do have the protruding welder and grinder setup there. So for an example, we're gonna use this one here, the first one, the welding one. And what we're gonna do is basically turn to my current welder, left click, and it's gonna weld up the whole entire system like so. As you see here, the system that welded up was that conveyor here, the conveyor corner tubes, and then the welder and a camera. So that is how the idea kind of occurred, that we can just do this as a modular system. And if we wanted to remove it, we use the grinder. That is where it gets a little tricky because this is where we're going to lose parts in this current setup. Because it's not going to grind everything down, and it just grinds down a few pieces or that conveyor junction, and the rest pretty much falls to the ground, so we just wasted parts, which is not a good thing. We definitely don't want to waste the parts, we want to recycle the parts. And we could just cycle this over as well. So we want to turn this into a grinder, we'll weld that together. And then of course, if we want to turn this into a drilling machine, same thing, we'll grind it down, but we're going to lose the parts in the front. So we could weld this one up, as you see here. But I did notice there's a bit of an issue because the 2 drill system is still a little too heavy for this machine. I think if I extended this crane arm, the whole thing will flip forward a bit because these 2 drills are quite heavy. But yeah, we can just change it up and turn it into a single drill, if anything, if we need to, which wouldn't be too bad. But of course, with the same setup again, we could grind down the system and then turn it modular by using a different system here. So that's kind of the idea, using projectors as a modular system where we have the tools here. It's pretty quick to do it because you can just cycle them over and over and over again like that. So you can always choose which one you want, weld it together, grind it down if you want to switch to another one. So I think this kind of works out, but of course, again, having the hinge and the welder attached to the crane itself, not the most ideal thing because it makes it bulky for it to actually be able to maneuver it. So I had come up with different ideas. Idea number 1 is to pretty much use the same exact setup with the projectors. So we can always project the welder, the grinder, the drill system, and then we're going to use a base to kind of grind down what we don't want and then weld what we do want. So as simple as we can do it, it's going to look like this, where it's not sophisticated whatsoever. It's just puts down some grinders, put down some welders, and hope for the best in this way. So how that's going to work, if we get into our crane here. Okay, so from here, let's just say, for example, we want the welder system. So we can always put the projector on for the welding system and then extend our crane arm to get this all welded up, as you see here. So that's all welded up and we're good to go do some welding, right? But what if you want to change it? So again, this is a simple little setup, might not be the best setup in the world, where you can grind down your welder here, or your drill, or whatever the case may be, and just extend it as far as you can. But this way, at least we're recycling most of the parts here, and we're not losing it. Except for the camera, I have an issue with the camera that always falls off. But at least this way, we're not losing too much parts, and we get back the welder, we get back the conveyor corners and the conveyor junction. So we have all those materials back in the grinder. And of course, when we're ready to weld it down, we just bring this crane backwards and it just welds up everything here, as you see there. So we can push the grinder a little bit more left so that it's not welding and grinding at the same time, as you may have saw it right there quickly. But again, if we want to kind of switch off the system, we easily grind it down here. And we're using mostly the crane to control everything, so we don't have to worry about getting out of the crane system and then coming to press a button on the base. We just left these things on and off. This is the most simplest way we could possibly do it. But yeah, if you want to switch off, let's say have a little drill system. So I created a separate drill system here, and what you can do is just back it up and it just welds it together. Now we have a single drill arm here, which is not too heavy as we had it for this 2-arm one. And of course, if we did really wanted to, we can put the grinder one instead. So we just grind it down and things like that. That is the idea with this not too sophisticated type of base, and easily just doing it as quickly as possible. But if we want to get a little bit more complicated, a little bit more ease, I think we can change up the setup by making it a little bit more automated with some timer blocks and things like that. This is a quick put together design, not the best design in the world, to be honest. I'm sure you guys can come up with something a lot better, but I do hope these quick builds do kind of inspire you to make something similar or a lot better. And if you do have an idea to make something a lot better, feel free to share it in the comments below. I would love to kind of take a look and see what you've done with it as well. Right, so the idea for this one is that it's a little bit more automated, so that way we can push what we don't want. So let's just say we want to get rid of the grinder tip here. We push it on the grinder here, it'll grind it down, and we're not going to be moving the crane arm much at all because everything's automated in the base of it. So once you finish grinding things down, after a few seconds, the welding arm will rotate upwards and weld up the part that we want or the tool that we want, and then it'll just reset itself. So this one is done with like a sensor and some timing blocks, a rotor, and a 2 grinder and 2 welders there. So just show you for an example how this kind of works, and I'll leave the sensor field on here really quickly so you can see how it looks like. For an example, if we wanted to let's just say get rid of the grinding arm, we're gonna push this guy forward and then turns on the grinder and it'll grind down the pieces here. But of course we still gotta use the crane arm to maneuver a bit so we can grind down everything else here, and that should take care of that. And of course I still have that big problem with the camera. I gotta figure that one out. Maybe I just get rid of the camera, but after a few seconds it will spin like so. And if we want the welding arm, so we put the welding arm there, and when it's ready it will get everything completed, and we just back out of the sensor, and after a few seconds it's gonna rotate. So that one's just as easy as the one before, but this one you just move a little less. I am pretty sure you can make it even more complicated than that, to make it automatic where you can just stick in the crane arm, things come apart, things come back in, and then you're done. So you don't have to do anything at all. So as you saw from when I did it, there was a bit of maneuvering here and there, but it wasn't too much, to be honest. So if you are looking at trying to make a setup like this, ideally you want to have a sensor to detect when there is a subgrid, large grid, or rover, or ship, or base, whatever the case is, to set that up. So then when you pass through it, it's gonna tell your grinders to turn on. I have it both grinder and welder turn on at the same time, going through the timers. So then once the timer hits, it starts the next timing block 20 seconds later, and then the action here is basically rotate the arms here, and then it'll stay there until I leave this sensor array here, or field. Once I leave the field, what's going to happen is going to trigger one of these timer blocks. I believe is this one. And after 5 seconds, it's going to turn off both the welder and the grinder, and it's going to rotate it to reset it back to what it was previously. So, of course, you can kind of mess it up if you leave the field too early. It's going to kind of cycle it and not reverse the correct way. But, you know, it's a simple, sophisticated system, but not too much. But it kind of works out. More importantly, this is a setup that is necessary for this, because you need to have the projectors attached to more of like a static grid in order to project it and connect it. So another idea I thought I was able to do was put a projector here and attach it to the piston arm. That's not going to work because that's a subgrid piece and attached to a more static piece here. So that definitely doesn't work. But yeah, so I'm sure you guys can come up with a more sophisticated way of doing it, but I've never tried a modular system using projectors. So I thought maybe let's give it a shot, see how it works, and hopefully inspire you to do something similar or something even more sophisticated other than a crane arm or something like that. And just as a tip, if you didn't know how to do the sensor field, I think I explained it before in the past series. You just pretty much go to the terminals or your control, go to info, show sensor field range, and then you go right into your sensor block here and show on HUD. So that's how you pretty much get that field showing. But of course, if you want it off, just turn show on HUD off, and of course you don't see the field anymore. So that kind of gets a little helpful there. But yeah, other than that, if you are curious on what my setup was for the sensor, 5 meters left and right and 20 meters front, and then we have, I left some things on default, but the ones I turned on was detect large ship, detect station, and detect subgrid for the hell of it. So that will detect whatever passes through the field to activate the system. So my person will actually activate it if I pass through it, as you heard there, and it's gonna cycle through. So yeah, other than that, it's just setting up timing blocks. I'm not the best person at setting up timing blocks, so it might take more timing blocks than it needs. But yeah, it's just one thing linking to another, to be honest, and then telling it to do certain things. So it worked out for this, but can get a little tricky sometimes if you pass through the field a little too much or too often. Alright, so that's a successful experiment that you can make modular system with the projector, and it's fairly easy to do so at the same time. So that's good news, and if I am gonna create the crane again in the Pertam Wasteland series, I definitely will be doing this to make it a lot easier to create a modular system instead of creating separate tools and storing it and changing them out. And of course, and as always, if you made it to the end of the video, please hit that thumbs up, like this video. If you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button and notification bell to be alerted of next videos. I always appreciate comments, so feel free to drop one below. And of course, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.